what would happen now that David was getting old? What would happen after David? How would things go in the future for Israel, in the days of Solomon, in the days after Solomon? The answer to these questions is what we can find answered as we explore the book we call the First Book of Kings. The book of First Kings is numbered among the Nevi'im, or the prophets, in Israel, because it is considered as written by the historical prophets, the ones who wrote down and preserved the historical record and preserved God's judgments regarding the kings in that record. So what we are reading is based upon the primary chronicles that have been written at the time, and the time of this book goes from the end of the days of King David around the year 960 BC until the end of the days of King Ahab around 820 BC. And so there would be primary chroniclers that would be preserving these documents about what happened in these reigns. You have some of them that are very highly celebratory of the leaders. We can see especially with Solomon. But it's all being put together and composed as an account by a faithful prophet, probably in the days of the exile in the 6th century, who is telling the story for Israel in the future and for us to see what happened in Israel's history. This book is called in the Septuagint Third Reigns, and that's probably the best way for us to look at it. That 1st and 2nd Samuel are 1st and 2nd reigns, 2nd Kings will be 4th reigns. This is this continual narrative being compiled by the same prophets from all these historical documents telling us about the history of Israel. And as we said, this tells us the end of David's reign, the days of Solomon, the division of the kingdom after the days of Solomon, and the rise of Ahab, and the work of the prophet Elijah. A major theme in 1st and 2nd Kings actually is the prophets. You'll see more of the prophets at times than the kings, because much is being made of the word Yahweh speaking to the kings through the prophets, and explaining to Israel how it happened that these kingdoms fell, and how they had betrayed God, and how they as Israelites needed to be more faithful to God than their ancestors had been. And we can draw appropriate lessons also. So we consider the substance of the book. The first 2 chapters get you to Solomon on the throne. David starts out, he's very old. He needs a young woman to sleep, to be in bed with him to keep him warm. Adonijah, his 4th son, decides he's going to be king. And he gets Joab and Abiathar to commend him for that. At the same time, Nathan and Bathsheba go talk to David, and David reaffirms that it is Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, and David, who should be king after him. And David then commands for Zadok and for Nathan and Benaiah to go and proclaim Solomon as king. And they go and they do that. Adonijah finds out about it, and he becomes afraid, and he tries to appeal for his life before his brother. In chapter 2, we have the Godfather moment that David has, where David brings Solomon in and tells him how he needs to deal with guys from the past like Joab and Abiathar and Shimei, and to make sure that they get the message that they need to get, right? And so David then dies, and we see how Solomon secures the throne in chapter 2. How Adonijah asks for Abishag as wife through his mother Bathsheba, and for this Solomon has Adonijah killed. Joab knows his days are numbered. He tries to preserve his life by going to the tabernacle. He is killed. Abiathar is dismissed, thus fulfilling the prophecy the house of Eli would no longer have any priests serving before Yahweh and at his tabernacle, as established back in 1 Samuel. So Shimei is told he must stay in Jerusalem. He leaves Jerusalem at some point, and because of that, he is executed. And so all of the enemies, or those who had caused difficulty in the house of David, are gone. Now Solomon is reigning in power. And chapters 3 through 10 really show you what Solomon's reign is all about. Solomon marries Pharaoh's daughter. He goes to offer sacrifice at Gibeon, and God asks him what he wants, and Solomon asks for wisdom. Because he asks for that, God also gives him honor and riches and glory. And the great wisdom of Solomon is celebrated in the book. But then we see all of Solomon's royal court, and we learn how the people of Judah and Israel were innumerable sand of the sea shore. They had plenty to eat and drink and were happy. The chronicle here is definitely trying to say that the fulfillment of everything God had promised Abraham and the fathers whatever had not met its fulfillment in Joshua has definitely met its fulfillment in Solomon. That these are the good old days, and they are the golden days of Israel. Solomon reigns secure on his throne over an empire, and Israel is able to enjoy prosperity. But also the text will show how much it costs to keep the king, and how every tribe has to feed him for a month, and how he has all these people in his employ, just as had been warned back in the days of Samuel, 1 Samuel 8 and 1 Samuel 12. But much of 1 Kings 5 through 9 is about the temple, where Solomon gathers the materials from Tyre and has everything made for it. The temple and its construction are described elaborately. He has all Israel gathered together in an assembly, and he dedicates the temple, and he has this great speech in chapter 8, praising God and asking God to hear the prayers of the people at the temple, and when they sin, that receive atonement and the sacrifices there at the temple. And there's a great feast, and the cloud, the presence of Yahweh, fills the most holy place of the temple. And God gave Solomon the promise and the warning that if the people, follow him and do what they're supposed to, he will be there with them and dwell there with them. If they disobey, they will suffer the consequences. There's other building projects that are described, and other things that happen, like travels to Ophir and the Red Sea and things, and you learn just how fabulously wealthy Solomon and his empire are, how gold everywhere. Silver was accounted as nothing in Solomon's day because of the amount of gold everywhere. And of course in chapter 10, the Queen of Sheba, probably from modern day Yemen, hears of his wisdom, comes and is overwhelmed by Solomon and his wisdom and the greatness of his kingdom, and leaves overawed by what God has accomplished through Solomon. So you look at the end of chapter 10, everything looks like it's great and wonderful. Everything is going well. But then in chapter 11, you get the reality check that not all is well. That Solomon has all these wives and concubines, and because of them, they're serving other gods, and Solomon is induced to honor these gods, and God is now unhappy with him. And that the promise was made that in days of Solomon's son, the kingdom would be divided. The Edomites rise up in rebellion. The Arameans rise up in rebellion. And these rebellions will persist. And then Ahijah the prophet will meet with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who is told he will become king of 10 tribes of Israel. Solomon then dies at the end of chapter 11. From chapter 12 to chapter 15 and 16, we kind of have the period between Jeroboam, Rehoboam, and Ahab. This is actually passed over pretty quickly in the narrative. The first thing that's highlighted in chapter 12, of course, is the division itself. Rehoboam, all Israel gathers to him. They want him to relieve their burdens. Rehoboam doesn't listen to the wise old counsel. He listens to his fellow young punks and decides he's going to try to act like he's more of a man than his father was. And because of that, Israel revolts against him. And the 10 tribes all leave, and they call up Jeroboam and make him king over them. And Rehoboam wants to fight, but God says this came from him, and the fighting is allayed for the moment. But then we learn of Jeroboam's great transgression at the end of chapter 12, where Jeroboam is concerned that if Israel goes down to serve God in Jerusalem, they're going to want to go back to Rehoboam. And so he sets up competing temple cults in Dan and Bethel, and has golden calves installed in these temples and called Yahweh. And they have non-Levites serving as priests, and they have different festival days. And this will be something that the author of Kings will consistently condemn the Israelites for. And from now on, we speak of Israelites, we're speaking of the northern kingdom. We speak of the southern kingdom, we're speaking of the Judahites. The northern kingdom will be consistently condemned because all their kings are serving at these temples and expecting honor to Yahweh to go to these temples, and this is a persistent transgression. The northern kingdom has the more fertile areas and the greater population. They are going to be the stronger power. Judah is the weaker power, and we're going to see particularly why in a moment. Now, when Jeroboam sets all this up, God had promised him a dynasty, but then the promise comes, well, your dynasty is going to be destroyed because you have proven faithless. A man of God comes up and even says that there would be a later Davidic descendant, Josiah, who would destroy these things. And you'll see that come to pass in 2 Kings. Then we have this bizarre story that happens here where Jeroboam wants this guy killed, but when his hand extends out, it becomes withered and shriveled. And by the word of the prophet, his hand was restored, and Jeroboam then relents, would have this guy eat food, but this guy said he's not supposed to eat any food. This man of God from Judah is not supposed to eat any Israelite food. As he's going back, there's a prophet from Bethel who hears he's there and calls him and invites him to eat food. And the prophet from Bethel lies to him and says, "Oh, no, an angel told me that I should feed you." And so the guy eats. The guy is persuaded. But then the word of Yahweh fills this Israelite prophet, the one who had lied, and said, "Well, because you disobeyed God in listening to the guy who was speaking falsely, even though now he's speaking the word of Yahweh, he's going to meet doom on his way." And actually, as he departs, a lion meets him in the road and kills him. The prophet of Israel is told about this, to go see the guy, the lion's still sitting right there, and there's the dead guy. And he takes the dead guy, buries him in his own tomb, and says to his son, "When I die, bury me on top of him, because his word is true." And it will happen that way. A bizarre story. So many theological questions from that. It's just told for us, and then the story moves on. Jeroboam's son will get sick. He sends his wife to talk to Ahijah. She tries to cover up who she is, but Ahijah knows who she is and says, "Hey, actually, that kid is the one I find something positive in. That's why he's going to die first. And then the rest of you are going to perish, and your dynasty is going to end." This is thus the way that we describe the end of Jeroboam's reign. Rehoboam's reign, which is parallel, of course, is also described. We're told that in Rehoboam's time, Shawshank I, Shishak, comes up from Egypt, and besieges Jerusalem, and to send him away, they give away all the gold in the temple. So that's why Judah is now in a really bad condition. They are now impoverished because they don't have as good of a land, they don't have as high quality, they're always going to be behind Israel, and they're constantly fighting Israel. We're told there's constant war between Jeroboam and Rehoboam. After Rehoboam is not a great king, his son Abijah is also not a great king. He lives 3 years and he also dies. Then we have Asa. Asa rules for 41 years, and he is considered a better king. He kind of puts his mother away because she's been committing idolatry. He though, will make an agreement with Aram to fight against the Israelites so that he can take all of the stone that Baasha, we're going to figure out him in a minute, is trying to build Ramah as a defense or as a point of aggression against Judah, and takes it to build Mizpah on the other side of the line. And so Asa is able to do well, and Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, will rule after him, and we'll get to Jehoshaphat later because he will come up in the story of Ahab. But now we come back to the story of Israel. Very quickly, Nadab, son of Jeroboam, reigns. He reigns a couple of years, and he is killed by Baasha. And the whole house of Jeroboam is killed, according to the prophet. And now, so the Davidic dynasty is still reigning over Judah. The Jeroboam dynasty is now over. So there's a new dynasty with Baasha. But Baasha also commits sin, and a prophet named Jehu condemns his line. And so Baasha dies. His son Elah replaces him as king. Elah reigns a couple years, and he is killed by Zimri. And so now we have the end of the second Israelite dynasty with the end of Baasha. And the family of Baasha when Elah was king. Zimri was only king for a week, though, because Omri, the head of the army, was proclaimed king at the same time, and he went, besieged Tirzah, where Zimri was. Zimri throws himself into the fire, and he dies. Then there is a division, kind of, you could see two dynasties at the same time. Omri has support of some. Tibni, another guy, had support of others. However, Tibni, his supporters weren't as strong as Omri's, and so as the Omride family takes over. And so now the Omride family is the third generation, if you want to, or fourth generation, actually, if you want to look at the fourth dynasty set, or fifth, even if you're going to include Tibni. We're going to say the fourth dynasty now over Israel in a very short period of time. But it's the Omrides who are going to be the most prosperous and powerful of all the Israelite dynasties. Omri is the one who rebuilds Samaria. Omri builds Samaria, and it becomes a capital. And it's in the days of these things that we start seeing a terrible pattern, because after Omri, of course, is Ahab. And Ahab, we're told, it's a little thing for him to walk in the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, that he also marries Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and by her influence, we see Baal being worshipped now more persistently and pervasively in Israel, and made much more central. Baal is the storm god, remember. And it's in Ahab's day that Heel the Bethlehemite rebuilt Jericho and lost his eldest and youngest in the building of it, just as Joshua had prophesied back in the day. The rest of the book of 1 Kings is really about Elijah and Ahab. Elijah is the prophet that now rises up. Elijah Tishbe, his name means Eliyahu, Yahweh is El, Yahweh is God. And he decrees, but by my word there will be no rain in Israel. And of course, if Baal's a storm god, you invoke him, you should get storms. But there are no storms because Elijah has not spoken it. And so there is now going to be a drought and famine in the land. He is first sustained by ravens in the Transjordan. Then he is sent to Zarephath in Sidonian territory to live with a widow. The widow survives and prospers because Elijah is there. Her son dies, but Elijah brings him back to life. And then Elijah is told to go and to meet Ahab, and this contest is supposed to happen. And Ahab says, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And Elijah says, "No, it is you who have brought trouble upon Israel." And then there's the great contest of chapter 18, where the prophets of Baal are all gathered at Mount Hermon with Elijah, and the decree said, "Which is God?" You stop being divided in your opinion. If Yahweh serve him, if Baal serve him. And so you have this great moment here where the prophets of Baal cry out all day, nothing happens. Elijah prays, and fire from heaven comes down, just as had been according to the contest. And all Israel says, "Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God." And then Elijah has all the prophets of Baal killed. But then Jezebel says, "May the gods do to me and more also if your life is not like theirs by tomorrow." And so Elijah in despair runs away, runs all the way to Beersheba, runs all the way to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai out in the desert. And he goes to see God there. And there's all these things that happen there, right? Powerful wind, an earthquake, a fire. God's not in any of these. But then there's that thin silence. And that's where Yahweh is. And Elijah comes out, and God asks, "What are you doing here?" And Elijah's like, "Lord, they have killed your prophets, they've torn down their altars, and only I am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And God kind of tries to snap him out of his theatrics a little bit and tells him to go anoint Elisha to be prophet in your place, to anoint Hazael king of Aram, to anoint Jehu king of Israel. And he will anoint Elisha right after this. And Elisha will do the rest. This is God telling Elijah how Baal service would be removed from Israel. And he tells, "I have left 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal or kissed him." And so there Elijah's kind of shaken out of it. God's going to have the victory. Elisha is going to be prophet after him. And the narrative now shifts. And now we see in chapter 20 wars between the Arameans and Ahab, and where Ahab is listening to God and Ahab gets victory. However, Ahab preserves the life of Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, and because of that, there is a judgment that it will be his house instead that's going to fall, not the house of Ben-Hadad yet, and that Israel would again have difficulties. In chapter 21, it's Naboth's vineyard. Naboth has a great vineyard. Ahab wants it. Ahab whines and cries when Naboth won't sell it. Jezebel conspires to have Naboth killed. Ahab gets Naboth's vineyard. Elijah condemns him for it. Ahab repents. It won't happen in his life, but the dynasty of Ahab would not endure. It would be destroyed in the days of one of Ahab's sons. In chapter 22, we see Ahab dying in battle. Very interesting scene there where all these prophets are saying that, they should go, he'll have success. Jehoshaphat is with him, king of Judah, wants to hear from another prophet. Micaiah is there, whom Ahab hates because he always has bad news for Ahab. Micaiah comes out and says, well, actually, I had a vision of God that a lying prophet voice was sent to the prophets so that you would do this thing. And then Ahab goes out, and he's killed in that battle, and Micaiah is justified. So at the end of chapter 22, we see Jehoshaphat's reign over Judah, how he made peace with Israel, and we're going to see that provides some benefits for him, but it's going to have some nasty consequences not too terribly long in the future, and how he had a ruined trip to Ophir, showing that the glory is just not there the way it was in the days of Solomon. And so we leave the story with Jehoram reigning as king over Judah, and Ahaziah is king over Israel. And that is where the story will continue in 2 Kings. Thus we have the story of 1 Kings, and we can see all these things going on in the days of Israel, from the days of the end of David until the days of Ahab, and why Israel needed to listen and to not follow in the ways of their ancestors that led away from serving God, but also the great glory that came to those who serve God and the glory of the first temple. So glad that you've joined us. If you have any questions, comments about 1 Kings, please let us know. Please continue our discussion, the conversation. I'm Ethan with the Venice Church of Christ, and we'd love to be of encouragement and service to you. Would you like to study the Bible with us or take a Bible correspondence course? Can we pray for you? Would you like to meet with us? If there's something we can do for you, please let us know. Please reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org. You can also find us on social media at Venice Church or Venice Church of Christ. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you and make his face to shine upon you until we will meet again.